are two studies we did about part-time work. This is Netherlands part-time country, because we are the land with the most highest part-time rate. Here you can see the labor force participation of the Netherlands. As you can see, more than 70% of the women in the Netherlands between the age of 15 and 64 have a job. And that's high. Here you see the amount of part-time work, and this is women, the dark thing, and these are the men. 3 out of 4 women who work in the Netherlands have a part-time job. So part-time is not rare. Full-time work, that's rare, the rare thing. And that's higher than, well, all other countries in Europe and, well, probably the world. And my colleague, Hans, is now going to tell how this is started.
Yeah. You see here an advertisal of Verkade, a big biscuit factory in the 50s. The factory still exists, and there on it states, "Girls, come and work at Verkade and bring your mother along." Well, this was end of the 50s. The situation was as follows: only young girls and young women used to work. Married women stayed at home, and they had to concentrate on their work to be a good housewife, to be a good mother. But in the 50s there were severe shortages of labor in the Netherlands. That has to do with the end of the Second World War and so on. It would be too much to tell this all. But employers were looking at new employees to make their firm do well. So this was the idea of Verkade. Many young women worked there, and so they asked them, "Ask your mother to come working here." And so Verkade was one of the first firms who introduced part-time work in the Netherlands. So this was the start of part-time work in the Netherlands. It was not a result of deliberate policy of the government. Many people think that, but that was not the case. It were the big firms who started with that. And later on, the government made an effort on it and said, we want to stimulate part-time work, and we will give an example. We as a big employer also started part-time work, but that was only in the 80s. So there was a lot of time between it. You see in this graph, the light gray part, that gives the portion of women who didn't work. So 40 years ago, that was 70% of the women, only 30% worked. And now, in the 80s, nearly 40% of women worked, and now it is still higher. The most interesting thing in this graph is that the part of women who work part-time has increased enormously, you see. And interestingly, the part of women who work full-time has all that time fluctuated somewhat, but stayed rather stable at 20% of all women. In the 80s, the government began to make an example and give part-time work to the employees. And what we see in these years, in the 90s, then the government made some improvement in the legislation for part-timers. In 1996, there was a law that discriminated that employers made a discrimination between full-time and part-time workers. So they must have the same pay, must have the same pension rights, all kinds of equal treatment. And then in 2000 there was a law that says it gives employees the possibility and the right to ask their employer, can I work part-time? And then the employer must agree with it, unless he has good reasons to do this not. These two laws are very important for the rights of the part-time workers. And we now see in other countries these developments are still now beginning to rise.
Why do the stable part-time jobs have the same characteristics as regular jobs? Because discrimination between full-time or part-time is simply forbidden. And that's European legislation. So it's forbidden to discriminate according to the amount of hours per week worked, but also between fixed-term and indefinite contracts. Now, fixed-term contracts, that's highly problematic to us. Highly problematic. Part-time, not so much. Why? Because the women who entered the labor market were not poor people, were not on the lower end of the labor market. And of course, if you look at this from a cultural perspective, the women who entered the labor market were voters. They're part of the mainstream of society. So of course they could politically and every wise, social cultural wise, you can get the government to legislate the way you want it because you are the largest group of society that votes in the three main parties: the Liberal Party, the Labour Party, and the Christian Democrats. So part-time work was never connected to precarious work, working poor, nothing like that. Are there any specific industries? Well, you'll find that in that article that it was mostly retail, care, cure, education, and services at first. But nowadays it's far more common in all kinds of... this led to this model that nowadays typical family in the Netherlands, mother, father, 2 children. The father will work full-time or 30, it's very modern for men to work 32 hours when the children are small, and the woman will work 16 to 20, 24. So between the two of them, they have 1.5 salary, which is sufficient to live on fairly well here in the Netherlands. And then they will have 3 days of childcare. The men in the professional areas, the men will take 1 day off. He'll work 4 days a week. Maybe he'll work 4 days of 9 hours. And then they both have 1 day at home with the children. So that's the typical, that's I think what people strive for. That's the ideal way to do it.
Here you see young women without children, 4 out of 10 already work part-time. These are the women with young children, then almost everyone works part-time. Here are the women with children and at secondary school, almost as much work part-time. And here are the women who have grown-up children, and you can see that almost every one of them still works part-time. So a big reason, here you can see a cut. A lot of women start to work part-time when they have small children, and that's their main reason to work to work part-time. They want to combine work and the care for children. And in the Netherlands, we think that a lot of people think that formal childcare is not good, and the other half of the people in the Netherlands think that it should be limited to only 3 or 2 days. So 5 days formal childcare. No one in the Netherlands thinks that's a good idea. So that's the part-time work is the way to combine work and family life. Here you see that working part-time, the percentage of people who work part-time. And you can see that also on the academic level, a lot of women work part-time. More than half of the women who work at the academic level have a part-time job, and it's higher in the elementary and lower levels, but it's also on good jobs you can work part-time. And also there's no difference between having a permanent or a temporary job because of this law of anti-discrimination of part-time workers. It's not allowed to make a difference. So the possibility to work part-time has made it possible for a lot of women to work. Women who only want to work or can work for a few days or even one day, they can work in the Netherlands. They can work 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. So I think that this possibility has increased the labor force participation of women and made it so high as it is. But it has frustrated some other goals in the emancipation policy, and it has frustrated the government is afraid that now when there are now less young people and a lot of older people, we need more people to work. So they now try to get more women to work more hours, not full-time because that's a way off, no one wants that, but to work bigger part-time jobs. So we had a task force Part-Time Plus to try to get women to work more hours and try to get employees to offer them more hours and to stimulate them to work more hours. So this task force mainly focused on the culture of part-time work. But as you can see, well, this is till 2007, but it's going on like this. Women work mainly 25 hours a week, and that's very stable. So this seems now to be a stable element of our culture, and maybe, we don't know, maybe because now in this crisis, we have a crisis, as you know, we don't hear the government talk about women working more at this moment because we have unemployment, and maybe this crisis will change the culture, what the Task Force Delta Plus could not.